to Off the Couch with Dr. Greg. I'm Dr. Greg, Cason psychologist, and this here is my producer, Brian Gomez. Hey, Brian.
Happy Monday, you guys.
And we're also here with Gus on the board. Hi, Gus.
Hello.
All right. Off the Couch is where psychology meets everyday life, and we've got some studies that really do touch our everyday lives. This week in psychology, we're doing, does wearing a mask make you seem more or less trustworthy? Now, I don't mean like a one of those masks to commit a crime, but, you know, like wearing a surgical mask, COVID mask. Number 2, can a single piece of paper cure your anger? 3, can your personality predict whether you're single or in a relationship? And in the news, why are men randomly punching women in the face? We're going to get to that. So does wearing a mask make you seem more or less trustworthy? What do you think, Brian?
Okay.
Say honestly.
I feel like they're just sick. So if they're wearing the mask, I know sometimes it's for people that like can't get other people sick. Like it's part of their job to be healthy if they're taking care of elderly or like, you know, but sometimes whenever I see somebody with a mask, I'm always like, who's sick? Are they sick?
And Gus, do you trust people in a mask?
I think so.
Okay, good. You know, if you see somebody in a mask, if it's flu season and they're sick, then it's okay. Then you're okay with that. Okay, well, there's a study done because during the pandemic, we all got pretty used to people wearing masks. It became kind of a common social norm. And now things are semi back to normal. I think we still see masks much more than we used to. So it was kind of interesting that the researchers at Swinburne University of Technology in Melbourne, Australia, really wanted to look at the perceptions of masked, unmasked, and otherwise obscured covered faces at the time. And it's pretty cool that they did this study back in 2020 when we were at the height of COVID. And really that question is out there. I've seen other studies that kind of said, you know, when someone's wearing a mask, do you trust them more? So they looked at masked, unmasked, and otherwise covered. Actually, what they did is they kind of took a picture, just a neutral picture of somebody, and then they gave just the normal picture, then one with a mask, and then one with a computer like laptop cover covering their face. They did a study with 373 Australian participants. They did 3 different years, 2020, 2022, and 2023. About half their participants were university students, and the other half they just kind of gathered through social media. But the other one half were students, but the other half worked full or part-time. And they asked them about the trustworthiness of the masked person, the unmasked person, and the obscured faces. And they published this study in the journal Perception. And the findings kind of tell what maybe you guys were saying, is that people tended to trust. Well, back during the pandemic, during 2020, they trusted masked faces more than unmasked faces at the height of the pandemic. So in 2020, I think that was true for all of us. You saw someone with the mask. What was that kind of a signal of? Do you remember for you?
Oh, yeah. I was just like, they're doing the right thing. And it's like, we're all on the same page right now. Like, we're all doing this if we're all wearing a mask. And if you saw somebody at that time not wearing a mask, it's like, are you a shitty person? Oh, I'm sorry. Are we allowed to cuss?
Well, I guess we are now. The question, yeah, I mean, it was basically that, you know, people were wearing masks because they were responding to an unknown threat that we really didn't know a lot about, but we did know that this was going to be helpful in transmitting that threat. So the trust was actually much higher for masked faces in 2020. But the boost in trustworthiness has now worn off. Now in 2023, masked faces, the people wearing a mask, are no more trustworthy than unmasked faces. So we don't see them as less. We could sometimes see them as less trustworthy, but we don't see them as more trustworthy. So it really does seem like there was a point in time when it really mattered. And according to this study, it really it really reflected people's attitudes towards masks in general. There were the positive effects of masks during the pandemic, and it was based on protecting yourself and others. But outside contexts where masks are normative, we tend to prefer and trust outside of those contexts. Like during the pandemic, we tend to prefer and trust unmasked faces more. I can't say masked and unmasked. It's just like a lot that going on there, and obscured. There's a belief that we can get a better read on someone when we see their whole face. So that's basically it. And I think that's kind of true. When we can see someone's whole face, we can kind of get a sense of who they are and kind of feel them out a bit. But every time I see somebody with a mask on now, I just think, is that person sick? Either they're sick or they're trying to prevent disease. So I never think anything other than that. Either they're sick or trying to prevent disease. So I think either they're being kind to me by not spreading their illness, or they may have an immune system that they can't take that risk, which I respect. So I actually don't think a lot of it. But I do. It's funny because it was before the pandemic. I remember when I would see someone with the surgical mask on outside of, and I used to work in a hospital. You'd see it in a hospital all the time. But outside of a hospital, when you'd see someone with a surgical mask on, sometimes I was curious why that might be. And I generally thought that they were ill or trying to prevent illness, but it was a little more unusual at that time, but now it's pretty usual. We see it all the time. Okay, well, I thought that was kind of interesting as a study, but who knows? But this one definitely is. So, who in here has anger problems? Who has problems controlling anger? Who, Brian, might that be?
I've been working on it for years.
You have?
Yeah.
Well, we might have the answer for you, because good news from the researchers at Nagoya University in Japan. They are concerned, this was concerned about controlling anger because, if you express anger at home or at work, that can have really negative consequences. So this research that they did at this university really built on some previous research on the association between the written word and anger reduction. We've always known that writing about anger and doing certain things that involve the written word can actually be involved in anger reduction, but they took this a little step further. And this is not the first time this finding has come out, but it definitely was interesting the way they did it. They had participants write their brief opinions about social problems. So they just had these study participants write their attitudes or opinions down, like a little mini essay about a social problem, and they gave them a prompt, and one of them was, should smoking in public be outlawed? Then these people who volunteered to do this study were told, once they finished that writing, they were told that a doctoral student at Nagoya University would now evaluate their writing. Now, the doctoral students who did the evaluation were plants. They did the same thing every time. So they weren't really evaluating. They were just saying the same thing to all the study participants because they were trying to control the outcomes, and you'll see how that works. So the students wrote it down. They were told the doctoral students would evaluate, and the participants, the evaluators, every time told the participants, they scored the paper low on intelligence, low on interest, low on friendliness, low on logic, and low on rationality. And then they wrote the same insulting comment on every single paper. The comment was, I cannot believe an educated person would think like this. I hope this person learns something while at this university. What would your response be?
I mean, I would be pretty pissed too.
So after handing out the negative comments, the researchers asked the participants to write their thoughts on the feedback and to focus on what triggered their emotions that they were having. Then they divided the groups into two different groups. So they had one group that was to dispose of the paper in a trash can, so they would dispose of the written comments and the essay, just throw it away. The other half of that group, they had keep it in a file. Then they looked at a different group who they said, okay, with your paper, shred it in a shredder or put your paper in a plastic box. So one threw it away in a trash can, one kept it in a file, one destroyed the paper in a shredder, one put the paper in a plastic box. Then the students were asked to rate their anger. They had to rate their anger after that insult and after disposing of or keeping the paper. What do you guys predict? What do you think happened?
Ooh, I would personally think that the shredding the paper would make them feel the best.
Shredding really worked. Do you have an opinion, Gus?
I mean, I think I agree with that. That seems the best way to vent something out.
Right?
Shredding is satisfying. As a matter of fact, shredding did really work, but then so did throwing it in the trash can. That's what kind of amazed me. So discarding the paper either in a trash can or shredding it help people return to their initial state after disposing or shredding the paper. So they return to their initial emotional state from before they were given the harsh feedback. So people that held on to a hard copy of the insult experience only experienced a small decrease in overall anger. So if they wrote it down and put it in a file and held on to it, their anger didn't really do much at all. And that has been a comment, that has been a recommendation that some anger professionals, I really don't do this, but some do. But throwing it away, I think, is really clever. And this really reflects a Japanese tradition called hakidashi sara. So hakidashi in Japanese refers to the purging or spitting out of something. And sara refers to a dish or plate. So it's quite literally the spitting out of a something, or the purging of a dish or plate. And this is done at something called the Hayoshi Shrine just outside of Nagoya. And Hakidashi Sara is an annual festival where people smash small discs that represent the things that make them very angry.
That's cool.
Yeah, they were basically testing in this study, the concept does doing something like that work. And it seems to really work. And it really does show that it's not the smashing, because we've talked about how smashing may not work. In fact, can increase anger. But it's the smashing of the representation of the thing that makes them very angry. So it's really destroying the thing or throwing away the thing, throwing away the angry thought. It's discarding it that really seems to help.
That's cool. It's almost like letting go of that moment and just, yeah. It's funny you even say that on RuPaul's Drag Race. There was an episode where one of the other drag queens told one of them that was going through like a little emotional episode to write down all like the insecurities and everything, and then told her to read it out loud, and then after reading it out loud to throw it away and shred it up. So it was cool that like people are out there practicing it. Right
on. Yeah. You get some good therapy going on in RuPaul's Drag Race, got to come correct. Okay. So good news. Well, The next story is really one I think is fascinating. Can your personality predict whether you're single or in a relationship? What do you guys think of singles? Then you think of like Sex and the City girls, all running around New York in glamorous clothing, social calendars packed, drinking Cosmos, all having glamorous dates and drama associated. Is that kind of what the single life is like? Is that what today's single girls are out there doing?
Sometimes.
Okay. Well.
No. I mean, I don't know.
They don't do laundry. They just do takeout.
No, we go out to eat.
They do. I see. Okay.
Eat and drinks.
Eat and drinks. Just Cosmos. Is that still a thing?
Espresso teenies.
Yeah. You're up and buzzed. Okay, so people in relationships have often been thought to be more satisfied with their lives than single people. We hear this a lot. We hear a lot of research around it. We hear all this, you need to be in a relationship. Why aren't you married yet? But we also know that there are many happy singles, and relationship status may not be the key to someone's happiness. It may be their personality. So there's a study done by the University of Toronto. They decided to find out and look to see if certain personality traits make someone likelier to be single or in a relationship. And then they published this in the Personality and Social Psychology Bulletin. So in this study, they recruited over 1,800 participants. It was quite a large study, and they between the ages of 20 and 59 who had been you either had to be like single for at least 6 months to be in the single group, or in a relationship for at least 6 months to be in the relationship group. So no newbies. You had to be, one of those. You had to be committed to your singleness or your relationship status at that point. And they gave people they gave them questionnaires to kind of see where they're at. They looked at their personality, and we're going to talk more about what they assessed with their personality. They looked at satisfaction with their relationship status. They looked at sexual satisfaction. They looked at overall life satisfaction. And they wanted to reveal how personality traits affected the well-being in the context of relationship status. So they wanted to say, okay, whatever your relationship status is, do your personality traits play a role? Do they play a role? Do they play a role in how good you feel about your life, etc.? Now, they use this model of personality, which you guys probably don't know. People in the psychology world really know it. And this is sort of a positive model of personality called the Big Five model. The Big Five model looks at it looks at 5 different dimensions. One is extroversion, and extroversion versus introversion. And that's looking at how outgoing or how high energy you are, or you could be introverted and kind of be on the opposite end of the scale. The second big factor is agreeableness. That's how compassionate you are or respectful. The next big factor is conscientiousness, which is being how productive you are, how dependable you are. Then there's neuroticism, how anxious you are and how depressed. And openness, how curious you are and how creative you are. What are you thinking about? What you are there?
Yeah.
What do you think?
I don't know. I feel like I'm a weird. I mean, maybe this is just everybody that you have a little bit of all of it.
Well, yes. I mean, everyone falls somewhere on a scale because either you have high or low in these particular things, and then that kind of makes up your personality thing. I think I'm kind of high in all of them. I definitely, I've got a lot of good qualities, but I got some of the neuroticism too. I can say that pretty confidently.
I feel, yeah, same here. It depends on the day.
But what about you, Gus? Do you feel like you know?
I feel like I'm all over the spectrum. Some of those things I definitely have high, and then some of those things it's like, yeah, no, I don't have that.
Well, we got to give you guys Big Five personality tests. You have to remind me. I'll give you guys
we should
those.
do that for like next week or something.
We can do that. That would be fun. I mean, if you want to talk about your personality on there, but
why not?
But it's kind of a cool test. But the findings were kind of interesting, where it really mattered where somebody fell in the introversion versus extroversion scale. It seemed that single scale was the most tied to if people are going to be in a relationship. So if you're single, you tend to be more introverted. And if you're extroverted, you tend to be more in a relationship. And we'll talk about that a bit more. People think of introverts as asocial, not interested in people. That really isn't true at all. People who are introverts do enjoy their time alone. They tend to want independence. They can emotionally self-regulate on their own, and many prefer being single. But I know a lot of introverts in relationships. I don't think this precludes someone from being in a relationship. I think it's just that introverts don't have to be in one, where it seems like extroverts might be pushed a little bit more over that line. Extroverts, they're generally happier. They tend to report happiness more than introverts. And that's, who knows? They tend to find themselves in more social situations. They tend to meet more people. They tend to gravitate toward more people. Thus, they can wind up in a relationship more easily just because the function of those things. So it's not to say that really they're doing anything different or wrong. It's just that extroverts tend to find themselves in these kinds of circles where relationships might be formed. And being in a relationship for them increases their confidence and widens their social circle. So for them, they tend to function very well in a relationship. About 2/3 of people are extroverts. Oh. So, and about 1/3 are introverts. So poor introverts. They always feel like they're completely isolated. They're in a minority, and people just, don't even know they exist because they're home reading a book. There's some other weaker connections. Conscientiousness and neuroticism also play weak roles. So just to go over, single people are less likely to identify with conscientiousness. This kind of surprised me. I have to drill down on this. I don't know why this might be. But this is the conscientiousness, things like keeping things neat and tidy or getting things done. Do a lot of single people not get things done and keep things neat? I know lots of neat and tidy single people.
Yeah, I would expect.
So I don't know, but this is what research does. Sometimes stuff comes up, you don't quite know why. But the other one is single people are less likely to identify with neuroticism too, which I thought was funny too. Can be tense, often feels sad, is temperamental. So, conscientiousness and neuroticism. Conscientious people are more likely to be goal-oriented, especially toward traditional goals, getting a job or getting married, and a strong work ethic, both attractive to mates and increase the desire to commit to a relationship. So, I think that's kind of self-explanatory. This, I think, when one's depressive symptoms, which can be high in neuroticism, can work against you in being in a relationship. So I think there's a dual thing going on here. Sadness and low energy can keep you out of a relationship. They can make it difficult to pursue and maintain a relationship. But if you're in a relationship, it helps your symptoms. So, I think it's kind of self-evident that some people just do better when they're in relationships. So really, we have to say kind of confidently that there's no winner, and there shouldn't be one. You don't have to be someone you are not. Be true to yourself, and you will find the right path. So be happy who you are. Just be more of who you are, and then you will find the right way.
That's true. And it'll last.
And it will last? Well, I mean, it's there to stay, so... It's when you have to put on that cloak of fakeness, that's the one that can get peeled away easily.
And I'm sure exhausting too.
It can be exhausting, I suppose. Yeah.
a lot easier to just be yourself.
It can be. It can be. And, then, when people like you, they like you for you.
Yeah.
Not some, fake. So Gus is from New York City. Gus, you're from Manhattan, huh?
Yeah, I was born in Manhattan, but I lived a lot in Brooklyn, but I also lived in Manhattan for a bit too.
Oh, right.
I've done both boroughs there.
Brooklyn as well. Well, that's, for those in the know, Brooklyn is, well, it depends on where in Brooklyn. Where in Brooklyn?
I was Bensonhurst, so right by Bay Ridge, but I also lived in Park Slope for a while.
Oh, okay. So. Well, yeah, you can do Park Slope's close in. And basically, Brooklyn is just across the bridge or tunnel. Either one. But yeah, so you can maybe tell us, Gus, we're going to talk about in psychology in the news, why are men randomly punching women in the face in New York City?
I can't tell you that. I don't know.
Do you know, Brian?
I haven't. It's hopefully some mental illness situation going on because this is insane.
Well, we're going to talk about that. So multiple women have reported being punched in the face by men while walking in New York City, in Manhattan specifically, in Lower Manhattan. So it's been in a kind of a specific area. I used to live in New York City. Nothing like this ever happened. You saw a lot of weird stuff happen. I never saw anything like this. So this was really a new one for me. Yes. So as of April 3rd, 2024, this is the last time I had a date update on this. The New York Police Department was investigating 12 incidents of women being randomly punched in the face in Manhattan, with 6 arrests made and 2 more suspects identified. The attacks have been documented on TikTok, with some users sharing follow-up videos after being attacked. So this was interesting too, the TikTok angle, and one that made me immediately suspicious, and I don't think I was the only one, because some people were like, well, the overall crime in New York is actually down. Did you know that, Gus? New York is becoming...
Yeah, I think also that just has to do with it becoming, the different people going there, It's just...
Safer people going there now?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, that's nice. That's probably because I moved out. But anyway, the misdemeanor assaults, though, like these little things, are actually up 10%. So who knows what's going on there. So, but on March 27th, the New York City Council's Women's Caucus issued a statement stating reports of the attacks were not a hoax. So it sounds like they were directly speaking to me, because I was like, this is weird. But she said they are not a hoax, but at a part of an alarming trend in violence against women. So it led, I saw this in the New York Times, but it's also written about in the Washington Post and other major publications. And people are kind of wondering, is this sexism? Is this hatred of women or misogyny? Is this mental illness, as you said, Brian? That's kind of a question. Well, they did arrest one suspect. This is in New York police, and I'll describe, and you can kind of tell me what you think with this guy. 40-year-old Skyboki Stora. That's a hard name to say. Skyboki Stora of Brooklyn. There you go, Gus. Is charged with misdemeanor assault in connection to an incident with one of the people who was hit. I'm not going to say her name because she's a social media influencer. So she's the reason perhaps we know about this is she made a huge deal of it on social media to her 1 million+ followers, and then her video was viewed millions of times. Stora, who pleaded not guilty in his Thursday arraignment, remained in custody on Friday on $10,000 bail. Anyway, Stora is the perennial local candidate who's in the last 3 years has launched unsuccessful long-shot bids for governor, mayor, and city council member, according to public records. His social media is dotted with frequent posts of him posing shirtless in front of Donald Trump flag, excuse me, or instances of him filming and harassing women on the street or subway. So...
I don't even know what's going on with the world anymore. That's just weird. Like, all of that was just weird. Like, who does that?
Well, who
Or
films
raised
themselves harassing women on the street or the
Who
subway
raised
and then
this kid?
post-
Like, that's freaking weird. Like, that's gross.
Yeah.
That's weird.
So there was a study. This is a study done by the published in Psychology of Men and Masculinity in 2018. This is kind of an interesting study because it was done in Tijuana. So, it doesn't quite apply, but I think some things came out that were interesting. They looked at whether men's misogynistic attitudes were associated with poor mental health and substance abuse. So they really looked at, they were trying to look at men and their attitudes toward women, and did it come out in possibly thinking negative things about women. So they measured a series of statements. Things are like, women have never treated me well, and it won't bother me to hurt a woman physically. And they found that people who had higher misogyny scores were associated with heroin use in the previous 4 months, or have reported depressive symptoms or low self-esteem. So, and they, in the defense of the way the study was done, they were looking at a substance abusing population. I mean, so they were looking at, higher risk individuals, basically. So they were looking at higher risk men and wanted to test their misogyny or negative attitudes towards women. And they found, again, that, if they had used heroin recently or had depressive symptoms or low self-esteem, they did have many more negative attitudes. But what about the role of social media? That's what really got to me. This was big on TikTok. It was also big on Instagram. So it seemed that people putting this forward really played a big role. And one thing we know is there's a psychological principle called a copycat effect. We've probably heard of the copycat effect. You always hear about this in conjunction with serial killers or arsonists. They're always worried about this. And this is a principle that describes when people commit crimes due to constant media coverage of criminals, and this coverage gives criminals a type of fame which can provoke other people to behave in a similar fashion. So basically, when you read about someone else who did something to get famous, you're like, hey, I can do that same thing. People will read about my crime, and maybe even I will get famous. But I don't know that they necessarily want to get caught, but they want their crime to be something that's put in the news media.
Is that because their life is kind of meaningless?
Well, that's good. That's a good question. That's something I don't know. I don't want to say without knowing. I wouldn't say that their life is meaningless necessarily, but maybe that's what will give them, they thinking that would give them meaning. I can say for myself, I have never even entertained doing something like that because my life has way too much going on. So one wonders about the person who would think about doing that. I used to work with people serial arsonists. I used to work at a VA, and we had some really interesting characters come through there. And one thing that really kind of amazed me was how enthralled they were. Like it was almost sexual for them. Wow. To start a fire. And people would talk about crimes in different ways. So I was really, it was a very interesting thing. I won't go into it too much.
But we should talk about it at some point, because that's interesting to think of how people view their crimes or crimes in a certain way.
Yeah. Well, here, though, we have to look at the role of influencers. So it seemed like that guy, when he's putting his social media post up, he wanted to be an influencer because he's posting himself being misogynistic towards women, and then eventually hitting them, I guess. And then we also looked at these people who posted this who were also influencer. One had 1.2 million followers. And she said, I'll put what she said. You guys, I was literally just walking and a man came up and punched me in the face. This was a fashion influencer in New York. She posted on March 25th. And since then, she's gotten 49 million views. Sorry. That's a lot. 49 million? That's Super Bowl numbers. I mean, that's a lot of people who look at her video. Collectively, TikTok videos of women reporting getting punched were viewed over 70 million times. TikTok's algorithm picks up videos users are interested in and curates similar ones into a moment, scooping up related videos even if they are months old. So when you go on TikTok, if you start looking at one, you're going to look at others. They're going to keep sending them to you. So what do we blame? Because sexism is certainly playing a role. Hatred of women, we certainly got some evidence from that guy. Mental illness, we haven't assessed him, but it's not looking good. Social influencers wanting clicks, that's kind of playing a role, because even if they don't want to get hit, which I doubt they did report it on social media, then it gets amplified on social media.
I do have to say, though, I don't think that was the intention behind it. And
Nope.
I think it was more of like, I'm spreading this so other women are being cautious and careful when they're out on the street walking, and this doesn't happen to you.
Oh, that wasn't the impression I got from watching the videos. But yes, I will have to go back and watch that. There was one woman who kind of intrigued me in what I did read about this. She was a comedian. She was 30 years old, and she had been hit, and she did not... she may have reported, but she did not post about it in social media. She later came out and she said when she started to see this, to say, oh, this had happened to her as well. But she did not do that as a way to either get fame or anything. So it seemed like her motives were quite sincere. So that person, it was interesting how she came across very differently than some of the others who just came across as like, I'm putting this on video. I was just hit, and I'm making a moment video. So I don't know, I don't think my first thought would be to pick up my phone and film me saying I was just hit in the face to the public. But you would?
I don't know if not instantly. I would definitely when that happens, you're kind of in shock, and that's not, I hope, the first thing.
When you're in shock, so you may maybe make even bad decisions at that point.
Or maybe that was her in shock. I don't know.
Maybe that's her in shock. I don't know.
But I mean, in that sense, I would want to tell people, hey, there's some fucking asshole out here hitting people. Watch out. It
was weird. I don't think the social media, just being a social media influencer is bad and wanting clicks is bad. But it was interesting that was the first thought about many of the people posting these. And we're assuming they are correct, because the amplification on social media has ended up being part of the problem. So the amplification on social media has created perhaps a copycat effect, because now several men are doing it. This isn't like a virus that's out there, so now other people are doing it as well. So I think we've got all these things: sexism, misogyny, mental illness, social media influencers, amplification on social media, TikTok's algorithm, and the copycat effect. So here we are looking at the fact, you look at a single behavior, and we want to stay away from things like conspiracy theories where we say it's just one thing. I think we need to look at all the factors that bleed into this phenomenon. I doubt this will keep going. This seems like this is like a flash in the pan phenomenon. And New York, as wild as it is, tends to be a fairly safe place. It can be very unsafe, but tends to. Didn't you feel safe there, Gus?
I might be a bit biased, but yes.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know.
I feel like, though, the one thing that people always tell me, people live in the city, it very much is like a gender thing where, most men feel safe in New York City, but there has always been, I know female friends who live in the city who, they feel safe in certain areas, but definitely not across New York or across the board, so. Yeah.
And that's a good reminder that, you know, being someone of a different gender is like living in a different world, especially because many men are quite aggressive, including this dude we talked about in the story. So sexism is very real, misogyny is very real, and all the rest is very real. So we need to be aware of those things.
And also be there for the women that encounter any mistreatment as well.
I mean, seriously, that's the other thing that kind of shocked me. It's like, did no one? Well, I mean, these people slug and run away.
Yeah.
So it's like, what
it's
just
kind of
happened?
hard to just, you know, chase somebody down like that. But yeah, if you see somebody getting mistreated like that, or even like catcalls, I think is just sometimes gross. Where I'm like, I don't know, it would suck to be a girl. I'm sorry, you know, I would hate to live in that world and constantly be harassed. So.
Well, you know, that's so you need to do your best. We all need to do our best when we see incidents like this, to prevent them and to intervene. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And to make this world a safer place for everybody.
Because we all came out of a woman, so.
There you go. That's assuming we all did, unless we're
aliens.
Or aliens or science projects. Yes, I think most of us did. I think everyone in this room. Well, that wraps up the show for today. A reminder to like, subscribe, to give us 5 stars, to links to go to my YouTube page if you want to see the studies. Go to youtube.com/Dr. Greg. Brian uploads those. Thank you, Brian. And also, if you have any questions or topics you'd like us to discover, hit me up on the socials at Ask Dr. Greg. This is Dr. Greg, Brian, and Gus bidding you farewell. Until next time, be present, be flexible, and be kind.